Welcome and thank you for standing by. At this time, all attendees are in a listen-only mode. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted publicly. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. Now, I'd like to turn the webinar over to Kim Brown. Kim, you may begin.
Thank you, Greg. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on Introduction to Geographic Areas. My name is Kim Brown, and I'm a training specialist here at the Census Bureau. I want to thank you for joining us today for the Exploring the Diversity of Census Bureau Data webinar series. This new series, created by the Census Academy team here at the Census Bureau, is meant to assist the novice to intermediate data user. These webinars are a great opportunity for you to learn from our experts about how to access the Census Bureau's data, tools, and resources. If you wish to follow along, take a moment now to open an additional browser. You can register for any of the webinars by visiting census.gov/academy. Before I introduce today's speaker, let's go over a few important housekeeping rules. As mentioned earlier, this webinar is being recorded. For your convenience, it will be uploaded to our Census Academy site with all supplemental materials relating to the webinar within 30 business days. We welcome written questions during the webinar. Please submit your written questions using the QA panel, which is at the bottom, center, or right side of your WebEx screen. Please take a moment to locate that now. Once you found the QA panel, make sure you choose All Panelists from the drop-down menu. This will ensure we see your question. Also, we ask that you do not include any personal or business identifiable information with your questions. We suggest keeping the chat panel open as we will provide key links and other resources throughout the webinar. Keep in mind you won't be able to respond to the chat. That is for us to send out links and other resources related to the presentation. My colleagues Carol Miller and Jolie Golden will be monitoring the QA panel. As time allows, we will answer your questions directly through the QA panel, or we will share your question with the presenter to respond to during the webinar if there is time. If we do not get to all questions, we plan to respond to those questions after the webinar, and we will post the question along with responses with the webinar material on the census.gov/academy site within 30 business days. As you may know, we are in a virtual environment and sometimes technical difficulties might occur. If you are having issues, try a different browser such as Chrome, or consider logging out and coming back into the session. If you are having audio issues, try selecting the computer audio or calling into the webinar via phone. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers, Michael Riedman and Sam Abbasi. Thanks again for being here today. Michael, you may begin.
Thank you, Kimberly, for the introduction, and thank you to everybody who is tuned in today. All right, so geography is central to the work of the Census Bureau. It provides a framework for survey design, sample selection, data collection, tabulation, and dissemination. You know, geography really provides meaning and context to the statistical data that's collected by the Census Bureau. This webinar will cover the different types or explore different types of census geographic areas and their histories. Understanding the concepts taught in this webinar are an important baseline to understand, you know, as you go on to conduct searches with census data and download different data and whatnot. Like Kim said, my name is Michael Riedman. I'm a member of the Geography Division at the Census Bureau. I'm also I'm giving the first half of this presentation. The second half of this presentation will be given by Mr. Sam Abbasi from the Customer Liaison and Marketing Services Office at the Census Bureau. And without any further ado, Let's get started. Also, I just want to mention that this presentation contains no protected Title 13 data. And without any further ado, here we go. The Census Bureau's mission is to serve as the nation's leading provider of quality about its people and its economy. Today, the Census Bureau is responsible for conducting a total of 8 censuses and over 130 surveys that capture a wealth of statistical information about our country. Excuse me. By itself, this statistical information is important, but without geography, data users are not able to see the entire picture. Geography is what provides meaning and context to our statistical data. By tabulating census data at different levels of geography, a wide range of stakeholders can utilize our data to make decisions and take action. Today, the Census Bureau manages over 45 different types of geographic areas. Together, these areas cover all 50 states, the District of Columbia, and all U.S. territories. The geographic areas managed by the U.S. Census Bureau can be categorized as either legal and administrative or statistical geographies. Understanding these designations can give you key insights into the way the Census Bureau maintains geographic areas. So at the top here, you'll see legal and administrative areas. And legal and administrative areas generally originate from legal action. The names and boundaries of legal and administrative areas are defined in official documentation. These areas are usually represented by elected officials. Legal and administrative areas can evolve over time through legislation, and legal and administrative areas are delineated for the purpose of administration of an activity or a governmental program. On the other hand, we have statistical areas. Statistical areas are geographic areas created by the Census Bureau and other stakeholders for data tabulation and presentation purposes. Statistical areas can provide coverage in areas where legal and administrative entities are incomplete or non-existent. Statistical areas do not require official legislation for their creation. Additionally, these areas are not usually represented by government officials or stakeholders. Statistical areas can evolve over time from practice, custom, usage, or need. And as we move through this presentation, legal and administrative areas will be represented in blue and statistical areas will be represented in red. So this slide serves as the glossary for the presentation. This presentation does not cover tribal or U.S. territory geography, and that is covered in other presentations that perhaps we'll have down the line. But these, you'll notice on the glossary, we list out 15 geographic areas. These are not all of the geographic areas that exist, but due to this presentation just being an hour long, these are some of the most important ones that we wanted to make sure that we got covered. And once again, you can see that on the left side of the screen, there's a key. The legal areas or legal and administrative areas are shown in that blue, and the statistical areas are shown in that red. All right, so for every area that we go through, as we go through this presentation, each type of different geographic area will be listed, and we will provide a definition of the geographic area, state whether the area has legal, administrative, or a statistical designation, describe the nesting relationship of the geography and how it fits into the geographic hierarchy. We'll discuss, when the geographic area first appeared in Census Bureau products or when the geographic area was passed into law, discuss the stakeholders and the programs responsible for creating that geographic area, outline the creation criteria for that geographic area, and describe or provide information about how the geographic area is stored in our map, or describe how the geographic area is updated. And then one thing to note too, we're going to maintain that color scheme that I described early on. So at the top of the slide here, you'll see will either be shaded, blue or red, depending on whether it's a statistical or a legal/administrative area. So this slide depicts the geographic hierarchy for non-tribal census geography. The geographic hierarchy is designed to depict nesting relationships between different levels of census geography. The hierarchy generally depicts the largest census geography at the top and moves down to the smallest geography at the bottom. Specific nesting relationships are depicted through two types of linear connections: horizontal connections and vertical connections. A vertical line represents a direct nesting relationship between a lower level and a higher level geography. For example, census blocks nest within block groups and therefore cannot cross block group boundaries. Counties nest within states and cannot cross state boundaries. A horizontal line represents a nesting relationship between a collection of lower level geography and a higher level geography. For horizontal connections, a collection of lower level geography fall within a higher level geography, but the lower level geographies have no relationship for one another. For example, voting districts and county subdivisions all nest within counties and therefore cannot cross county boundaries. However, voting districts and county subdivisions have no relationship to one another and do not nest within one another and can overlap one another. So as seen in the previous slide, the nation is at the top of the geographic hierarchy. All other census geographies fall within the boundaries of the nation. This image depicts the United States, Alaska, and Hawaii, but it is important to note that for the Census Bureau's purposes, the nation encompasses the 50 states and the District of Columbia. All right, so there are 6 geographic areas that nest within the nation level of the geographic hierarchy. You can see this shaded in gray. We're not going to cover all of the areas that are that nest within the nation, but we just wanted to list them all out to paint the full picture for you all. So the 6 levels of geography that nest within the nation are zip code tabulation areas, urban areas, core-based statistical areas, combined statistical areas, metropolitan divisions, and New England city and town areas, also known as NECTAs. As a reminder, although these geographies nest within the nation, they do not nest within one another, and these geographies can and would overlap one another. In the next set of slides, we'll discuss a couple of these entities that nest within the nation. So we're going to start out with zip code tabulation areas. Right off the bat from the color scheme, we know that this is going to be a statistical area. So zip code tabulation areas, also referred to as ZICTAs, are generalized aerial representations of U.S. Postal Service zip code service areas. Excuse me. When first created during the 2000 census, the term ZICTA was selected to differentiate between this new entity and the true USPS zip codes. Zip code tabulation area is a trademark of the U.S. Census Bureau, while zip code is a trademark of the U.S. Postal Service. ZICTAs are created and updated every 10 years through a 2-step process. First, census blocks are assigned a preliminary ZICTA. A block's preliminary ZICTA value is the most frequently occurring zip code within the block. Secondly, the blocks are aggregated into larger units of geography based upon their preliminary ZICTAs. ZICTAs have continuous coverage, but are not created for large bodies of water or unpopulated areas. So if you look at this map here, you can kind of see how once we get out west and, there's more park area or wilderness area or whatnot, we have some holes in the ZICTAs. But, on the East Coast or whatnot, you can see the density of the ZICTAs is much greater than, kind of out here where there's some big holes in the coverage. As of the 2020 census, there were over 33,000 ZICTAs nationwide. Now we're going to take a look at urban areas. Urban areas are discontinuous statistical entities comprised of densely developed core of census blocks that meet minimum housing unit density requirements. Additionally, they're comprised of adjacent territories containing non-residential urban land uses and lower density territories that link outlying densely settled territories with densely settled cores. To qualify as an urban area, a territory must encompass at least 2,000 housing units or at least 5,000 persons. The term rural encompasses all population, housing, and territory not included within an urban area. Urban areas were first created during the 1950 census and continue to be delineated after each decennial census. As of the 2020 census, there were 3,601 urban areas delineated nationwide. Next, we're going to talk about core-based statistical areas. Core-based statistical areas, also referred to as CBSAs, consist of counties associated with at least one urban area with a population of at least 10,000, and adjacent counties having a high degree of social and economic integration with the core as measured through commuting ties. CBSAs consist of metropolitan and micropolitan statistical areas. Metropolitan statistical areas are delineated from urbanized areas with a population of 50,000 or more. Micropolitan statistical areas are delineated from urban clusters with a population of at least 10,000 but less than 50,000. Excuse me. CBSAs are a federal statistical standard, meaning all statistical agencies tabulating and publishing data for metropolitan and micropolitan entities must use the OMB's definition for CBSAs. OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, is the main stakeholder and is responsible for establishing the criteria for core-based statistical areas. The Population Division at the Census Bureau is responsible for delineating these entities. And as of the 2020 census, there was 393 core-based statistical areas nationwide. All right, we're going to keep it moving along down the geographic hierarchy here, and we're going to explore some of the entities that nest within states. So we're going to start things off with incorporated places. Incorporated places are a type of governmental unit incorporated under state law, such as a city, town, borough, or village, having legally prescribed powers, limits, and functions. An incorporated place is established to provide governmental function for a concentration of people. Places are always within a single state or equivalent entity, but may extend across county and county subdivision boundaries. An incorporated place usually is a city, town, village, or borough, but it can have other legal descriptions. As of the 2020 census, there were nearly 20,000 incorporated places nationwide, and incorporated place boundaries can be, changes in boundaries to incorporated places can be reported through the Boundary and Annexation Survey, which happens on a yearly basis. Next, we're going to talk about kind of the counterpart of incorporated places. I should say the statistical counterpart of incorporated places, which are called census designated places, also commonly referred to as CDPs. So CDPs are statistical geographic entities representing closely settled unincorporated communities that are locally recognized and identified by name. They are the statistical equivalents of incorporated places, with the primary differences being the lack of a legally defined boundary and active functioning governmental structure chartered by the state and administered by elected officials. As we can see from the color scheme here, CDPs are statistical. We've mentioned that. They nest within states. As far as the coverage goes, you can see they have discontinuous coverage, and we'll see on the next slide when we do a comparison between incorporated places and CDPs in the state of Maryland that a CDP and an incorporated place cannot exist in the same place. It's either one or the other, or just simply unincorporated area. So CDPs are delineated cooperatively by state and local officials and the Census Bureau following Census Bureau guidelines. Some of the creation criteria for census designated places would be that it has to be a densely settled named community with no legally defined boundaries, and there is no minimum population or housing unit threshold. CDPs can be updated through the Boundary and Annexation Survey, also known as the BAS, or through the Participant Statistical Area Program, known as the PSAP. As of the 2020 census, there were nearly 12,500 CDPs nationwide. And so this slide is just a comparison between incorporated places in Maryland and census designated places in Maryland. And I just really wanted to illustrate the fact that, that CDPs and incorporated places, don't overlap, or it's either designated one or the other. Also, if it's not designated as an incorporated place or a census designated place, then it is simply just referred to as a unincorporated area. Congressional districts are the 435 areas from which people are elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. After the apportionment of congressional seats among the states based on decennial census population counts, each state with multiple seats is responsible for establishing congressional districts for the purpose of electing representatives. Each congressional district is to be as equal in population to all other congressional districts in a state as practicable. And this kind of shows, the entire point of the census and where we get our constitutional mandate to operate, one of the only executive governmental functions specifically mentioned in the Constitution. And so just looking, at the color scheme here, we know these are legal entities that nest within states, provide continuous coverage nationwide. They've been published since the first census occurred in 1790. They're created by the State Legislative Service Department or equivalent of each state, along with the U.S. Congress. Each congressional, like we mentioned, the criteria for the congressional district is that each congressional district is to be as equal in population to all other congressional districts in a state as possible. And the updates to congressional districts are reported to the redistricting data program. And this brings me to one of my last slides before I hand it over to Mr. Sam, but we're going to talk about another entity that nests within states called public use microdata areas, or commonly referred to as PUMAs. PUMAs are non-overlapping statistical geographic areas that partition each state or equivalent entity into geographic areas containing no fewer than 100,000 people each. They cover the entirety of the United States, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. The Census Bureau defines PUMAs for the tabulation and dissemination of decennial census and American Community Survey public use microdata sample, microdata sample data, also known as PUMS. Additionally, the American Community Survey and the Puerto Rico Community Survey use PUMAs to disseminate their respective period estimates. As of the 2020 census, there were 2,380 PUMAs nationwide. All right, thank you. And I'm going to turn things over to Sam.
Thank you, Mike. So let's continue the navigation down the hierarchical chart. Mike took care of nation all the way through states. I'll continue with counties all the way to census blocks. So if you move down along the left here, we're going to talk about counties. Counties are the primary division of a state or a state equivalent area. 48 states use the term county, but other terms can be used, such as Alaska, which uses borough, Louisiana uses parish, and municipal is used in Puerto Rico. Whatever the term that's used, most states use these designations as the primary administrative division. In Alaska, their equivalent are the organized boroughs, cities and boroughs, municipalities, and census areas. The census areas are delineated cooperatively for statistical purposes by the state and the Census Bureau together. Crossing the county in the 6 New England states, counties are less important as governmental units. Cities and towns, or minor civil divisions, are the primary units of local government. Just a fun fact, there are 3,235 entities across the United States. Now let's continue our journey by looking at county subdivisions, consolidated cities, and voting districts. Minor civil divisions, or MCDs, are the primary governmental administrative divisions of a county in many states. Again, parishes in Louisiana, or county equivalents in Puerto Rico and the island areas. MCDs in the United States, Puerto Rico, and the island areas represent many different kinds of legal entities with a wide variety of governmental or administrative functions. The Census Bureau recognizes MCDs in 29 states, Puerto Rico, and in the island areas. In the 6 New England states, MCDs are the primary units of local government, with counties having less importance. We also have census county divisions, or CCDs. The primary goal of the CCD is to establish and maintain a set of sub-county units that have stable boundaries and recognizable names. The boundaries of CCDs usually coincide with the visible features or stable, significant legal boundaries, such as boundary of an American Indian reservation, federally managed land, or conjoint incorporated places. A CCD usually represents a single contiguous area consisting of one or more communities, economic centers, or in some instances, major land uses that are relatively compact in shape. Since back in the 1950s, the Census Bureau has worked with state and local officials to replace MCDs with CCDs for the collection, presentation, and the analysis of Census Bureau data, particularly in states which MCDs do not provide governmental services and functions, and where MCD boundaries tend to change between decennials. For the 2020 census, CCDs are defined in 21 states, which include, now wait for it, Alabama, Alaska, Arizona, California, Colorado, Delaware, Florida, Georgia, Hawaii, Idaho, Kentucky, Montana, Nevada, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Oregon, South Carolina, Texas, Utah, Washington, and Wyoming. North Dakota adopted CCDs for use in tabulating and presenting data from the 1970 census. Following that decennial, North Dakota requested the Census Bureau again use MCDs to tabulate and present statistical data. Moving forward 40 years, and in the 2010 census, Tennessee requested that the Census Bureau replace its CCDs with county commissioner districts, which is a type of legal administrative MCD. CCDs have no legal status as statistical geographic entities and are defined only for the tabulation and presentation of statistical data. The criteria for CCDs are that each should first have a community orientation, second, have visible or stable boundaries, third, maintain relationships with census tract boundaries, and finally, have recognizable names. There are no legally established MCDs. The legally established MCDs do not have governmental or administrative purposes. The boundaries of the MCDs change frequently, and the MCDs are not generally known to the public. CCDs, however, exist within the following 21 states: Alabama and Alaska, where they are referred to as census subareas, in Arizona, California, Colorado, Delaware, Florida, Georgia, Hawaii, Idaho, Kentucky, Montana, Nevada, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Oregon, South Carolina, Texas, Utah, Washington, and Wyoming. There are 5,535 entities. In voting districts, also known as VTDs, any of a variety areas such as election districts, precincts, legislative districts, or wards established by state and local governments are for voting purposes. VTDs resulted from U.S. House Resolution 1753, which was enacted as Public Law 94-171 in late December 1975. This law directed the Secretary of Commerce to issue a set of technical criteria by April 1st, 1976, for states to follow in specifying the geographic entities for which they asked to receive data tabulations. The law also required the states to submit these geographic plans to the Secretary for consideration no later than April 1st, 1977. Finally, the law required the Secretary of Commerce to transmit the population counts to the governor and public bodies having initial responsibility for legislative districting in all states by April 1st, 1981, 1 year after Census Day. The Secretary of Commerce then delegated all responsibilities assigned by the legislation to the Census Bureau. And by the way, there are 158,444 entities. Fun fact. Continuing down the hierarchy, we have arrived at census tracts. Census tracts are small, relatively permanent statistical subdivisions of a county or equivalent entity that are updated by local participants prior to each decennial census as part of the Census Bureau's Participation Statistical Areas Program, also known as PSAP. The Census Bureau delineates census tracts in situations where no participant existed or where state, local, or tribal governments declined to participate. The primary purpose of census tracts is to provide a stable set of geographic units for the presentation of statistical data. Census tracts generally have a population size between 1,200 and 8,000 people, with an optimum size of about 4,000 people. A census tract usually covers a contiguous area. However, the spatial size of census tract varies widely depending on the density of the settlement. Census tract boundaries are delineated with the intention of being maintained over a long time so that statistical comparisons can be made from census to census. Census tracts occasionally are split due to population growth or merged as a result of substantial population decline. Census tract boundaries generally follow visible and identifiable features. They may follow non-visible legal boundaries, such as a minor civil division, or remember, an MCD, or incorporated place boundaries. In some states and situations, to allow for census tract to governmental unit relationships, where the governmental boundaries tend to remain unchanged between censuses. State and county boundaries always are census tract boundaries in the standard census geographic hierarchy. Prior to Census 2000, census tracts generally were defined only in metropolitan counties. Block numbering areas were defined in non-metropolitan counties. For Census 2000, the block numbering areas, also known as BNAs, were rebranded as census tracts. Though the terminology changed, boundaries generally remain the same. And another fun fact, we have 85,529 census tracts across the United States. Further down the hierarchy, we have census block groups. Block groups are also known as BGs, are statistical divisions of census tracts, are generally defined to contain between 600 and 3,000 people, and are used to present data and control block numbering. Most BGs were delineated by local participants in the Census Bureau's Participant Statistical Area Program, again, PSAP. The Census Bureau delineated BGs only where a local or tribal government declined to participate and a regional organization or state data center was not available to participate. A BG usually covers a contiguous area, and each census tract contains at least one BG, and BGs are uniquely numbered within the census tract itself. Within the standard census geographic hierarchy, BGs never cross state, county, or census tract boundaries, but may cross the boundaries of other geographical entities. With census tract versus BGs, tracts are intended to be stable. Edits should primarily be split and merges to allow for historic comparability. Completely redrawing the tracts in the county is referred to as retracting and is generally not allowed. On the other hand, BGs are free to get completely wiped out and redrawn from one decennial to the next. Block groups must not cross census tract boundaries. This criteria takes precedence over all other criteria or requirements. By definition, because census tracts cannot cross county and state boundaries, neither can block groups. It's only permissible to define a block group with fewer than 600 people in a county that has a population less than 600, coextensive with a special use census tract or a special use block group delineated within a standard census tract. For BGs, we have 242,748 across the United States. And our final geographical step are census blocks. Census blocks are statistical areas bounded by visible features such as streets, roads, streams, railroad tracks, and by non-visible boundaries such as selected property lines and city, township, school district lines, and county limits, and short line of sight extensions of streets and roads. Generally, census blocks are small in area. For example, a block in a city bounded on all sides by streets. Census blocks in suburban and rural areas may be large, irregular, and bounded by a variety of features such as roads, streams, and transmission lines. In remote areas, census blocks may encompass hundreds of square miles. Census blocks cover the entire territory of the United States, Puerto Rico, and the island areas. Census block nest within all other tabulated census geographic entities and are the basis for the tabulated data. Census block numbers are numbered uniquely with a 4-digit census block number ranging from 0000 to 9999 within a census tract, and nest within state and county boundaries. The first digit of the census block number identifies the block group, and interesting to note, block numbers beginning with a 0 are only associated with water-only areas. And you know this fun fact was coming, but we have 8.1 million census blocks in the United States. Here you can see census blocks, census block groups, and census tracts in Montgomery County, Maryland. These images illustrate the density of blocks versus block groups versus tracts. Here are some additional resources that are available to you and will be available along with the rest of the presentation on the Census Academy webpage that Kim mentioned earlier on in this presentation. This concludes our formal presentation, and now we've set time aside to field any questions that you may have about what has been presented. I'll defer to our moderators and Kim for our questions. Thank you.
Hi, it's Jolie Golden, and thank you for that wonderful presentation. Here are a couple of questions. The first one is commonly asked and is, can ZICTAs, zip code tabulation areas, be related to zip codes?
That's a good question. I mean, they're inherently related to zip codes. I'm just going to go back to the initial definition that I gave of it. And they are related to zip codes in the sense they are generalized aerial representations of U.S. Postal Service zip code service areas. What was it? The ZICTAs are created. I'm just looking here back in my notes, but basically I think they found the most commonly occurring zip code within the census block and then assigned the, here it is, census blocks are assigned a preliminary ZICTA, and a block's preliminary ZICTA value is the most frequently occurring zip code within the block. And then based upon that, they're aggregated into larger units. So yes, the ZICTAs are related to zip codes. And if you're looking to discuss that any further, feel free to send me an email. I'm not an expert on ZICTAs, but I can certainly provide additional information or points of contact if you wish to discuss zip code tabulation areas any further.
Okay, thank you very much. Here's another question. What are the advantages of statistical areas like PUMAs versus areas like census tracts?
So There's a big difference between those because pumas are huge areas and census tracts are much, 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 much smaller. You know, a puma might be, a puma, I think it was covers or is for an area that encompasses 100,000 people. Whereas a census tract, let me just go back in my notes here, encompasses an area that would be, one second here, no more than 8,000 people. So just knowing the population thresholds for that, the puma is, more than 10 times the size of a census tract. So that's the major difference there.
Thank you so much, Michael. I happen to be doing a upcoming webinar on pumas for anyone who's interested. And I just want to add in that you can find 1-year data from the American Community Survey using pumas. That is another big advantage, that you can break down the geographies in the entire state, whereas with census tracts, you're used to getting 5-year American Community Survey data. So that's my addition. Someone asked, how can we download the data that you're sharing? How can you download data about different geographies?
Yeah, so there is, if my favorite way to do it is if you just go to Google, you could type in Tigerline shapefile, and maybe throw Census Bureau in there too, and then that will bring up the Census Bureau's Tigerline shapefile download portal, and you can go in and target, exactly what geography you want, and whether you want to download it for the nation or just for a specific state or whatnot. But if you just did a simple Google search for tiger /line shapefiles, and then maybe just for good measure throw the word census in there, then that will take you to, like I said, our Tigerline shapefile download interface. And then once you're there, you can select the year or the vintage of the data, and then you'll have an option to select layer type. And then all of the areas that we discussed in this presentation, plus more, are available for download. And if you have any questions, oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to add, if you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out to me, and either myself or another geographer or another Census Bureau representative would be able to help you through the download process.
Okay, the questions keep rolling in. Here's another one. How will we know if a census tract boundary changed over time?
That is a good question. Let me just study for 1 second. So I believe that one of the goals of census tracts is to have relatively stable boundaries, so census tracts can be compared over time. But I am not as much of an expert on census tracts, so I would just invite you to email me, and I can put you in touch with the proper people who are the experts on census tracts. But it is my understanding and impression that one of the goals of census tracts is to have stable boundaries, so they can be compared over time.
Right. I believe sometimes we do subdivide those census tracts, and that's when you will see that 0.01, 0.02, the numbers in the census tract will change slightly. But you can also look in, I believe you can also look in TigerWeb to compare those census tract boundaries, and on the maps on data.census.gov. And there are many, many more trainings that you can do through census.gov/academy. I know that's part of what we always like to talk about. Okay, going back to CDPs. CDPs generated a number of questions here. And someone wanted to know, how are CDPs used?
So CDPs are created for the purpose of showing or applying statistical information to an area. So, for example, in Maryland, where I'm located, or in Montgomery County, Maryland, where I'm located, there is a CDP called Silver Spring, and for all intents and purposes, Silver Spring is like a city. It's going on there, but legally, Silver Spring is just unincorporated area in Montgomery County. But since we know that there's like a city there, and there's people living there, and a dense population of people, we want to be able to differentiate the citizens of Silver Spring want to be able to um, tabulate and get Census Bureau data specifically for Silver Spring. But like I said, Silver Spring legally is just unincorporated Montgomery County. So what the people of Silver Spring can do is work with the Census Bureau to get Silver Spring designated as a census designated place, and then it has a statistical boundary, not a legal boundary, but Silver Spring has a statistical boundary. And then with that statistical boundary, you can take Census Bureau statistical data and apply it to that statistical boundary, Silver Spring. So really, and Jolie, maybe you can elaborate this on a bit, anything that I'm missing here. But basically, a CDP lets you kind of place a statistical boundary around a place where that there's something going on, where there's a city, but maybe there's no legal boundary that separates it or defines it from the rest of the county or the area, if that makes sense.
Sure, Michael. So basically, those census designated places aren't incorporated. No one has paid to incorporate them. No one's paying taxes to those areas, but they are areas that people may be interested, or the town planner may be interested in tracking those demographics over time for whatever reason related to town planning, and city-state planning. So I believe I think did you mention, I believe there are over 12,000 census designated places in the United States. So it's
That
definitely
is
a
correct.
popular geography. Okay.
And I'll just add in there a quick CDP tidbit. CDPs used to be only updated once a decade through the Participant Statistical Area Program, but now they can be updated year in and year out through the Boundary and Annexation Survey. So if you are a city planner or a stakeholder of some sort that's interested in CDPs, I would encourage you all to check out just do a Google search for Census Bureau Boundary and Annexation Survey, and you can find more information about how CDPs are updated and whatnot.
So Michael, we had a question about a specific geography where they mentioned that it has the title UT. It's a Camp Lejeune in UT in North Carolina. I didn't know if that was a certain type of, you might have heard that's a certain type of territory.
I'm not familiar with that off the top of my head. If I had to make an educated guess, I would guess that maybe it stands for unincorporated territory, but that is purely speculation. And if whoever asked that question, if you'd want to reach out and email me, I can try to find the exact answer for you, so I don't have to speculate to it.
Sure thing. Okay. I know I've been rapid firing the questions at you. We have been answering a number of these questions, especially ones that are more detailed or technical, with a response that sends people to our Ask Data inbox, where you can request further training and information. And that's census.askdata@census.gov. So I'm just mentioning that while I'm scrolling through here. Okay, here's one. Based on the population size and the requirement that census blocks and block groups lie within census tracts, can there be a block group basically equivalent to a census tract? But does that make sense? So could a block group be the same size geographically as a census tract?
That is a good question. I mean, I don't know off the top of my head. I imagine if the criteria was right, then perhaps it could, we listed out the criteria on the slides, but I do not know off the top of my head for that one. And um if whoever asked that question, feel free to email me and I can put you in touch with the census tract / block group / blocks, kind of subject matter experts, and they can follow up with you on that. But I'm not sure about that one, so sorry to let you down.
Oh, I don't think you're letting anyone down. You provided so much information here.
But I also think that if there is an equal census tract and block group, it would probably occur in the most remote and rural areas of the United States. But again, I defer to what you had said about reaching out to you to connect with another expert.
So I think we're nearly at the end here. I know your information is up on the screen for anyone who wishes to reach out specifically to Michael or Sam. This last question is an interesting one because it's one that's come up recently. Do you foresee any new geographic entities being created in the future?
Oh man, that's a bit of an open-ended one. I think I don't know. A lot of what we do is, work with, tribal, state, or local governments in order to report, the changes in boundaries or whatnot. But we're also, we're not always as involved with, creating new geographies or whatnot as much as just reporting, what's out there for tribal, state, and local governments. So yeah, I'm not sure what the future holds, but I imagine that the geographies that we have now should be around for some time. And like we were mentioning with the census tract boundaries, a lot of these geographies are created with the hopes of, that they have, they can provide comparison between censuses or comparisons between, you can use a temporal comparison. So that's the benefit of having these geographies that have been around a while, because you could look back decades and see, what was going on with that geography for the 2010 census, the 2000 census, the 1990 census, or whatnot. So yeah, I'm not sure what the future holds, but I know we got a great set of geographies here, and they like, kind of that temporal aspect of comparison with the geographies that we have. Do any of the other panelists here have any ideas about that?
Well, I know one of your colleagues, Michael, spoke to our data dissemination team recently about the possibility of doing a new kind of grid-based geography. So we're always looking at new and different things. But one thing that he said for sure is that we would not be eliminating any of our past geographical references. So no one needs to get nervous. The census tract is not disappearing, but there is the possibility of looking at another more uniform way of measuring the landscape. I think that brings us just about to the end of time here.
Thank you, Jolie. I appreciate you passing on those questions. Michael and Sam, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for your great presentation. Before we conclude, I'd like to thank everyone who played a role in today's webinar. We thank you, our audience, for spending your time with us this afternoon. We're very interested in hearing from you on how well we are doing. Please take a moment to fill out the evaluation that will appear when you exit the webinar. Look out for the recording, presentation, and related materials from this webinar on the Census Academy by visiting census.gov/academy within 30 business days. Please check out the Census Academy for additional training resources and to register for any upcoming webinars. This brings us to a close. We thank you again for joining us today and hope you have a great afternoon.
This concludes today's webinar. Thank you for your participation. You may disconnect at this time.